welcome to my brand new YouTube channel. I'm Dr. Michelle, and tonight I am going to talk about domestic violence. But a few words about me first. First off, I am a doctor of education. That basically means I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a social worker, I'm not going to here to give you medical or advice, so please don't take that. This is for entertainment purposes only, but I have some really good opinions that I've gained over several years that I want to share. Tonight's topic is going to be domestic violence. Now, this might not be the most sexy topic to talk about, but it's something that's really, really important, especially with the holidays coming up. So, tonight I want to talk about domestic violence, and I want to let you know what I think about it. So, tonight's topic is about domestic violence, but at the same time, I want to liven things up a little bit. So, I'm going to do something a little bit unusual that maybe other people don't do on their channels when they talk about such a heavy topic as like domestic violence. I'm going to bake chocolate chip cookies because I am a mom and I do have a son who's always bugging me to have chocolate chip cookies. So I'm going to make cookies while we talk, and I'll give you the recipe and I'll link the recipe below also. Um, because chocolate chip cookies is about family, and domestic violence, unfortunately, is also about family. So tonight we're going to start off with what is domestic violence. But before we get into that, let me tell you a little bit about why I think you should listen to me and listen to what I think about it. I have worked in domestic violence for 15 years, 18 years, between domestic violence and victim advocacy, about 18 years. I started out when I was 10 years old. No, I'm joking. I started out after college when I was kind of not sure what I wanted to do. I started volunteering and then I quickly started working in the field. I worked in the field. I also have done perpetrator treatment counseling. So I've worked with both sides. I've mostly worked with women in perpetrator treatment, but I did work with men also. But domestic violence is one of those things that's been around forever. When the first caveman in the old stereotype drug his wife into the cave, through today, we've had domestic violence. And um, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this was that I actually had, and I totally believe in confidentiality, so I'm not going to go off and give names or any identifying information whatsoever. But I did have a really close friend call me a couple weeks ago and says, my husband, who I also know and also respect and really, really like, um, hurt me tonight. And I, like I said, no details whatsoever. So the very, very first thing I asked her about was, are you safe? Because that's the absolute very first thing you have to do is you have to be safe. And even though I knew that I hope I know that her husband would never physically done her, any major harm or any harm, I still, as the very first thing, I still had to ask, are you safe? And she was safe. She was fine. She had a place to go. And that's one of the problems is that some people don't have a place to go. So I will be putting the National Domestic Violence hotline number on the slides, but there's going to be a local domestic violence shelter or domestic violence agency in your area. You might have to go a little bit. So if you're listening to this and you are a victim of domestic violence and you need to get safe, and you need to get safe immediately, obviously you would call 911. Other than but if you're not like immediate danger and you need to talk to somebody, I completely encourage you to stop this video immediately and call the domestic violence national hotline or like a hotline in your area, wherever you happen to be. Because really, there's domestic violence agencies pretty much around the world anymore. Um, So like I said, while we're talking, I am going to make cookies. So the first ingredient in chocolate chip cookies is going to be butter, and I use butter. I don't use margarine. I don't use shortening. No, 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 please. Butter is the way to go. Um, and these always make cookies taste so much better. And some people used to shy away from butter because of the fat, but this is good fat where you have margarine or shortening, and that's bad fat. So this is good fat. So we're going to start our cookies with actual butter, 2 sticks of butter, and that's going to go in my bowl that's sitting in front of me while we talk. So let me get back to my friend. So like I said, my friend called me and she was very upset, and I don't totally understood that. And she was afraid, and she really said that that was the first time that she'd ever been afraid of her husband. It doesn't matter, kind of the reason why he was so angry. There's there's lots of reasons why people get it, why the a spouse might get really angry, um, and sometimes we just don't understand what it is. And that's kind of the key to even to anger, which I really hope to explore in much more depth someday. But the basics of anger is that when you're upset and you don't really have the capability or the practice to kind of to get that anger and talk to people about why you're so angry. What you're going to do, imagine having a huge uh, trash can in the middle of your chest, right? So you have this trash can in your chest, and every time you get angry, you imagine this is anger, a reason that you're angry, and it could be childhood abuse, it could be PTSD, it could be um, coming back from a soldier coming back from war, it could be the horrors that you see on your job, it could be whatever, um, it could be bullying, it could be whatever it might be. So what you do with this with your piece of anger that you shove it into your trash can, right? So you keep shoving all these things that you're angry about, you keep suppressing them and suppressing them. And unfortunately, as any trash can, it is only going to hold so much, right? So your internal trash can, right, is overflowing. So then what happens is you put in that last piece of anger, and this could be burnt cookies. It could be not doing the dishes. It could be um, anything. It could be the shoes on the floor or dirty socks on the floor. So this is what goes on in last in the trash can. And that trash can is so full and it's so brimming that, like any trash can, when you shove something in, there's all going to come out. And that's really a good analogy for some anger. Not all anger, but enough anger. So in a domestic violence situation, and again, I'm not belittling perpetrators or victims or anybody. What I'm saying is that that sometimes in situations that are not necessarily a violent situation, you have to kind of understand that there's still violence, there's still fear, but the real issue is not the last thing that came out of the trash can. The real issue is not, oh, the socks were on the floor or the wet towel that hadn't been hung up. It's all the other garbage that you have in your trash can. That's really what's going on. And so when a especially a spouse or girlfriend boyfriend or boyfriend or whoever, your significant other, when you have that fight, um, one person is really, really upset because there's socks on the floor or there's a wet towel on the floor. But in reality, that's not why anybody's upset. That's just like something. That's another thing that has occurred. It's all that other stuff underneath. It's all the other stuff, all the other unresolved stuff that hasn't been taken care of. And so that's why people get really confused sometimes when they get angry. And this is the same in my friend's case. So the person was really, really angry about something really small. and everybody was really confused. Both parties were really confused about why they got so angry over a towel or socks or whatever it might have been. And so you really have to sit down and you have to think about, okay, all right, I'm not raging because there's socks on the floor. I'm raging because a whole bunch of other stuff is going on. So let me go back to my cookies really quick. So one thing I forgot to tell you is that room temperature butter is, you got to have room temperature butter. So this has been out on the counter for for a little while. And so I have nice and mashy butter. You can put it in the microwave, but it will change the texture of your cookies. It's often flatter or sometimes even chewier. The softer the butter is and not melted because you're not changing the structure of of the butter. Um, it's more of a almost like, I don't want to say cakey, but it's more of that gooey cookie that we all like. Um, so, so my cookies, the next thing I'm going to do is add 2 eggs. I took these eggs out of the refrigerator about maybe half an hour ago. Um, they don't have to go be out for very long, but just kind of taking that chill off the eggs actually helps everything mix up really easily. So that's just another little tip to think about. So let's talk a little bit more about types of domestic violence, because we all know violence, right? So we all know that you can have physical types of domestic violence, and that's hitting and grabbing and pushing somebody up against a wall or down a flight of stairs, or whatever it might be. And it usually when domestic violence starts, it starts out at a very small or low level of violence, and then it slowly progresses. It's the continuum of domestic violence, the physical violence abuse continuum. And I mean, there's a real good reason for that. One, because usually, not always, but usually, if you're in a relationship and you go out on your first date with somebody and they break your arm, you're probably not gonna, you don't have anything invested in these people, and they don't mean that much to you, so probably, call the police and walk away, and you know, and not see them again. Um, but if you've been in a relationship, or you're married and you have kids, or you're, married and there's a lot of other relationship issues going on, financial things, it could be whatever. It's not that easy just to, oh, I'm going to walk away now, because you have a lot of investment in it. And there's a lot of psychological stuff that we'll get to in a little bit. Um, but yeah, so anyway, so that's kind of what everybody thinks of when they think of domestic violence, is the physical part. And hey, that makes total sense. But there's actually um, even worse. eh, Some people say it's worse. It's the verbal domestic violence. And the reason verbal domestic violence is can be so, I don't want to say bad, but can be so destructive to somebody, is because if you're called, nasty names, or told that you're not worth anything, or that nobody else is going to love you, or that you're a bitch, or that you're, whatever, fill in every single word you can think about, you're going to come to believe those things. You're going to soon believe that nobody can love me because, I'm ugly, or I'm fat, or um, I'm not a good wife, I'm not a good girlfriend, I'm not a good boyfriend, whatever it might be. So eventually you're going to believe that, and you're going to believe that nobody else wants you. So you're going to stay, and unfortunately that's what happens. And that's the piece that a lot of people don't understand. Because again, they can understand like a broken arm, and they say, if somebody broke my arm or hit me or pushed me up against the wall, I'm out of there. There's a whole bunch of other layers of abuse that occur before you get to the broken arm or whatever. Um, and there's something called gaslighting, and it's a really interesting concept. Briefly, it comes from an old movie, old black and white movie. And the whole thing about the movie was that the wife, was being slowly been driven crazy by her husband, and how he did it was that he would go out at night, and in these old black and white movies, they had these gas lights that were the light for like their little apartment, and there was only so much gas that came into the apartment. So if you had one light on and somebody turned gas, one of these little gas lights on in another room, then all the lights would dim a little bit. So this lady, her husband was going to, the club or whatever, and but actually, what he did was he went up like in the attic, and so he'd go up in the attic and turn the light on, which dimmed all the gas lights in the apartment. Well, so he, so she was like thinking there must be somebody here because these gas lights are dimming. But he would come home, or when she would see him, she's like, "Have you been here? What's going on? Somebody was here. The gas lights were being were acting strange." And he would tell her, "No, no, 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 you're crazy. The lights never dimmed. I don't know what you're talking about. I wasn't here. The gas lights not never dimmed. It just must be in your mind." And eventually, she began to think that it was just in her mind. So that whole thing is what domestic violence victim advocates took. It was gaslighting. So another example of gaslighting is actually my absolute favorite. It's one of my favorite Star Trek TV shows, Next Generation with Picard, Jean-Luc Picard. Anyway, um, so Picard was captured by the Romulans, I guess it was, and he was captured by the Romulans, and he was never physically touched or anything like that. But what would happen was that he would um, be brought into this room, and the Romulan generals or whoever were sitting there, was like three of them, and they said, "How many lights do you see behind me?" And um, Picard said, "Well, I think it was nine. I see nine lights." And they said, "No, there's only eight lights." And then they would send him back to his cell. And like I said, they never touched him, but they deprived him of sleep. They deprived him of like darkness. They kept the lights on in the cell the whole time. I think maybe even they like took like food. He didn't get a lot to eat and things like that. But they would bring him back to this room in front of these Romulan generals, and they would ask him, "How many lights do you see behind me?" He'd say, "There's nine lights." Well, this went on for a while. I don't know how long. It went on for a while though. And, so his number two saved the day, came and rescued him, and everything was fine. But later on, at the end of the show, he tells I think it was her name, Deanna, the ship's counselor. He's like, "It was a really good thing that you got me when you did, because I started to see eight lights, not the nine that I knew that was there." So that's just another example of gaslighting, and we do that quite a bit. My kids always used to do that to me. "No, Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing wrong." Yeah, right. So, um, just something that we do. But when you do it for the idea of you're hurting another person, that's when it's wrong, obviously. So we need to move on in the cookies. So I have my two eggs and my two sticks of butter. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add sugar. So I'm going to add all brown sugar. And did you know that brown sugar is white sugar and all it has is molasses in it? And light brown sugar has less molasses than dark brown sugar? That's all really molasses is. And I mean, brown sugar it just has molasses, which makes it just a little bit denser. I really, really like brown sugar though in my chocolate chip cookies. And the recipe normally calls for a cup and a half of sugar. So like three quarters of a cup of brown sugar and three-quarters of a cup of white sugar. I think that's way too much sugar. And so I'm going to add 1 cup of brown sugar. So I'm actually cutting the sugar, and that doesn't really affect the texture of the cookies. The flour is the kind of thing that if you can't really reduce the flour, but you can reduce the sugar. So I'm going to reduce the sugar. And here's just another tip. If you ever have brown sugar and maybe you don't use it very often, and it's in the cupboard and it gets kind of hard, all you have to do, if you need to use it like right then and there, is you throw in the microwave. Throw in the microwave for 30 seconds or something like that. It loosens it right up. But another thing to kind of keep in mind, if you ever have brown sugar, maybe you don't use it very often, and you don't, you want it ready whenever you're ready, you can put a slice of bread in there, and that soaks up like all of the moisture. Or you could take it out of the bag and put it in a resealable jar, and that usually helps the texture too. Um, but yeah, so, and I'm telling you all this because my sugar is a tiny bit hard, but I'm going to be able to get it out. It's no big deal. We're good. So I was talking a little bit about verbal domestic violence, and so kind of going along with verbal domestic violence, but I really think it's so important that it really needs its own category, and that's emotional violence. So emotional violence is that violence that is the type of violence that tells you you're no good, that nobody else is going to want you, um, and that's really, again, it's really difficult to hear that all the time and not start to believe it yourself. So if anybody you know is in a domestic violence situation, and they come to you and tell you they're no good, or they're worthless, or their desires or their ideas or don't have any merit or whatever, well, yeah, that's unfortunately, maybe you could talk to them about the other violence that might be occurring in their life. And there is one that's kind of hard to talk about, but that is sexual violence. So, and this is one that's it's kind of crazy, but it's basically only been a crime since like the 90s, in most places. Some places were a little bit more progressive, but a lot of times sexual violence, and I'm talking rape, I'm talking um, there's a lot of emotional violence that goes along with sexual violence. If maybe the partner likes sex and wants to have sex, and the partner withholds it or demeans them or something like that because they desire sex, then that's a form of sexual abuse. 'Cause the one thing about relationships is that when especially if you're partnered with somebody, they know all of your flaws, right? They know what makes you tick. They know, all that stuff. They know your insecurities. And sometimes they know if it's like a religious or, a cultural thing, they might know exactly what to say to make you feel shame. If you are in a religion that's not going to talk about sex, or, is ultra conservative, maybe, um, that's a really good weapon that somebody who's going to abuse might do. They might say that I'm going to tell everybody that you like sex, or I'm going to tell everybody that you're a whore, all that sorts of stuff. And that's, if that's um, in an immigration type of situation, if somebody's here, and that's a whole other issue too that we could talk about, but um, yeah, it's really hard because the last thing you want is your partner to tell your mom, for example, some intimate details, and even just the um, the thought that might occur will really change people. That they're going to come really, they'll do whatever you say really really quickly. But again, that's not healthy. That's not a good relationship, and that needs to be discussed. But anyway. So there's kind of one last sort of domestic violence, and it sometimes it goes along with verbal abuse, but that's financial violence. And you might be going, financial violence? That's kind of different. Not sure if I really ever heard about that. But financial violence is, you could have a partner that wants to know every aspect, everything that you spend. I'm going to give you $5 and you're going to go to the store and you're going to bring me the change, you're going to bring me the receipt and whatever item I told you to buy. Sometimes a woman is, and I say women, and I don't mean to say it's always women, but sometimes a partner is not allowed to work, maybe, or has to, do other things that they normally wouldn't do for money because of that relationship, because of their partner. Yeah, so financial violence is much more difficult to, it's not, I mean, you can't really like charge somebody, they've sent me to the store for bread and $5, maybe bring back the change. You're not going to call the police and tell them that, but it's a symptom of probably something else that's going on. And sometimes financial violence can be one of along with some of those low level verbal abuse, can be some of the first signs that a relationship might be turning violent or increasing in violence. So that's kind of what domestic violence is. So when I go back to my friend for a second, so you might be wondering what I said to her. So after I said, "Are you safe?" and I want to make sure that you're safe and that you have a safe place to go. I just want to make sure that everything is good. Then I said, call me tomorrow because you're in absolutely no shape tonight to talk. I know that you're safe, and you need to go, go get a good night's sleep and think about it and whatever. Um, and then we'll talk tomorrow. And so what I again, I'm not going to for because of confidentiality, but some things that I would have talked to her the next day, and I'm not saying I did because a couple of them I didn't. I would have discussed a financial plan. So, okay, so you left, do you have clothes? Do you have to go back? When does he go to work? Can you go get more of your stuff? Are you, what ideas do you have? Do you have a long-term place that you can stay? Um, I would talk to her or them about not only like a place to stay, but um, did you take, your driver's license? Because when you're gonna like leave a situation because it's, there's something bad going on, the last thing you're gonna think of is, oh, I need to take my passport, or I need to take my immigration card, or I need to take my driver's license, or I didn't grab the checkbook or the bank book or the ATM card or whatever, people use. Um, and so that's and once you're safe and the next day and you slept and the emotions have come down a little bit, that's kind of when you can start thinking about some of that stuff. I always tell somebody who might be in a bad situation already that they need to have like that to-go bag that they can kind of hide, or they keep stuff in their car, or if it's bad enough, they can have a trusted friend keep a copy. Like you go go to Kinko's or wherever, and you copy your driver's license and your bank card and all your your driver your birth certificate or whatever documents you need. You copy all of those and you give them to a trusted friend, and just say, just put these in a drawer somewhere, and if I ever come to you, I might need them at some point. And that's not saying that you're gonna. I'm not saying that that everybody is going to be in a domestic violence relationship. But if you ever feel like this is something isn't right, I love my husband, I love my partner, I love my, my boyfriend or my girlfriend or whatever, but I I just worry. Or maybe you've been in a bad situation in the past and you're in a new situation, in a new relationship, and you're just not sure about it because you don't trust yourself. Do it, go for it. Okay, so back to these cookies, I'm going to add vanilla, and I'm going to add, this is actually from Trader Joe's. This is pure vanilla. I don't like fake vanilla. Fake vanilla, no, no, no. And I always add a little bit more than I'm supposed to. So if it's a teaspoon, I add like a teaspoon and a half because I don't know, I just kind of like the flavor and it really does burn off. But pure vanilla is when you're going to bake, especially for, like Christmas coming up or the holiday season, get real vanilla. That's always my suggestion. And now I'm going to add some salt, and it's about a half a teaspoon of salt, I think. Let me double check real quick. It is, oh, a teaspoon of salt. Okay, so I have a teaspoon there. Um, so, and then you just mix, mix, mix. So, and just a side note, so I haven't added any of my leavening agents or my flour yet, and this I can mix this all day, and it's not going to hurt the consistency of the cookies or anything like that. The minute I add the baking soda, I have a window. I have a window to stir and to get it all mixed up, and then because you don't want to overbeat it once you get the baking soda in. So anyway, going back to what I would say to somebody the next day when they were leaving. Again, are you safe? Do you have what you need? And then the conversation starts about what are you going to do? What are your plans? And this is the hardest thing, believe me. Like I said, I did domestic violence for a number of years, worked in a shelter, excuse me, um, where there was a couple times the people that I brought into the shelter I knew. And one particular time, I knew the lady very, very well. In fact, I drove her across state to pick her up and bring her back and put her in a domestic violence shelter. I helped her get an apartment. Um, I helped her furnish the apartment. And in the middle of the night, at some point in time, he came and picked her up and took her back. And it's not one of those, oh, I saw her in the grocery store and I followed her home and saw her new apartment. No, we're talking halfway across state. So she called him. She called him. There was many reasons, and she didn't tell me she did it, and I didn't know until like the next day that was gone. But that happens, and she felt ashamed, and she didn't want to talk to me about it, which is sad. That's kind of probably the most saddest part of that because she isolated herself even more. So if she ever did need me, or needs help again, she wouldn't call me because she felt this horrible shame. Um, Not that I was judging her, but that's what she was feeling. She felt that way. I didn't feel that way. So anyway, that happens, women, even when they get away, even when they know they're in a bad relationship, they, for whatever reason, all the reasons I've already talked about, the continual abuse that they've gone through, or the fear that they're not going to be they're not going to find another person. There were kids involved, all that sorts of stuff. It all comes to a head. So that's something that I talk to other people about. Okay, so, what are your plans? Do you want to go back? And, which is maybe not the fairest thing to always ask, but I need to know, what are your thoughts? And, what do you want to do? Because I can't make that decision for you. I could, but then you're not going to listen to it, and that will drive a bigger wedge in between us. Because again, my goal is not to give advice, but to to help people think about what's going on in their life and kind of work on that. And that's really difficult, and it's really, really difficult for family members. When you have family members that invest a lot of time, money, some effort, all that into a family member that's in a bad relationship, abusive or not, then and then they go back again for lots of different reasons, then there's this huge wedge that's now there, and you have a helping family member that feels betrayed and not ever going to help again. I'm going to go back, never going to give them money again. They can go rot in their bed, all those wonderful things that I've heard people say. But honestly, people, you hope that people get better. That's the whole thing. Is that, the one thing that we all try to have in our life is hope. So, somebody says, well, he's going to change, he's going to go to counseling, he's going to stop drinking, he's going to, and I keep saying he, and I don't mean to, and this could be anybody, but, they're going to do all this stuff and they're going to get better, and they promise they're going to hit me again, and all this stuff. And I'm going to go to counseling because, there's something wrong with me, blah, blah, blah. You can't just ignore that. You can't just say, "Oh, you're bad, you're wrong, never call me again." You can't, because it might work, and you don't want to lose that relationship. If it's a best friend, if it's a family member, a sister, a brother, or whoever it might be, you don't want to lose that. Um, or it might not work out, and they will need you again. There's a statistic out there, and I never truly found if it was completely true or not, but some of the national statistics say that somebody will leave their abusive partner 7 times before they actually leave them. And I don't know. Yeah, that's weird. And because some will never leave, some will never leave for lots of really good reasons. So, and you might ask, what good reasons would you possibly be talking about? So, good reasons can be financial, they can be immigration issues, they can be, children issues. Children's a huge issue because if, you're in a relationship and you say, I'm going to leave you, he or the abusive partner, the very first thing they're going to say is, not with my kids. I'll call CPS. You're never going to leave here with them. In really bad situations, they will say, I will kill you, and then I will kill the kids if you leave. That's a really bad situation. But you can't ever poo-poo that because it happens, it happens. I used to live in Washington State, and years ago, I'll have to look up the year, but years ago, the police chief of Tacoma, was an abuser, and his wife left him, and she did everything she was supposed to be doing. They had kids together, and he wanted her to meet him like at his house or whatever and talk about the kids, or she filed a restraining order, she did everything she was supposed to do. But I can't remember now exactly if they were exchanging the kids, or she had the kids, or she had just dropped off the kids, or whatever it was. But he tracked her down and killed her, then he killed himself. And everybody was shocked. Crystal Judge was her name. His name was Brame. And I only tell you that because Judson, because a lot of good, well, there's never any good, but it did open a lot of people's eyes, because when police chief, right? The police chief is the person who did it, but also the community really came together and realized they needed a lot more services for domestic violence victims, and they opened the Crystal Judson domestic violence. I'm not sure the exact name anymore, like the domestic violence center. So it, had advocacy, it had protection orders, it had, courts staff, it had a whole bunch of people in one place. Because I'll tell you, because like I said, I working domestic violence in the past, um, could be very difficult. It can be very, very difficult to get a protection order or a restraining order or whatever you needed to get. Um, because one, it's just a piece of paper, right? So you have this flimsy piece of paper that obviously doesn't stop bullets, but you have to go to court. You have to prove that you need a protection order. You have to go before the judge. You have to pay fees that a lot of times can be waived, but you have to see a judge. They will more than likely ask you questions. They're going to judge you, right? Because they're a judge. And then you get a temporary order, and then the other party is served, and it's not enforceable until the other party is served. And then you have to go back to court. And a lot of times it's like within 14 days or whatever. You have to go back to court. The other person has a right to be there. And you have to tell the judge why you need this protection order in open court in front of other people. And especially if you've never talked about it in the past, then that's really hard. Go back, let's go back and talk about shame. Yeah. So too many people feel shameful, that too many people feel that they're at fault, that it's, all this stuff. And they don't follow through. They don't go back for that 2 year or that 2 week hearing. And then the next time they might need it, they'll think a couple times before actually getting it. And that's sad, because the courts are there, and you should be able to go back as many times as you need to, until finally, either you get the year. The order is good for a year when you do get it. Usually, sometimes, occasionally, there's a few that are good for life. Occasionally, there might be, depending on your area, it might be good for 2 years or something. But for the most part, we'll say it's about a year. Um, yeah, so you have this for the year, and then you have to go back to court. You have to repetition and all this fun stuff. So there's a lot of different things that you have to do. Okay, but I have to add flour to my. I excuse the bag. It's the end of the flour bag. I'm going to add 2 cups plus a quarter cup of flour, and it's so sad. When I was growing up, I got to eat cookie dough. Well, I didn't get to. I kind of just did, right? But and the reason I even thought about that is at the top of my bag here, it says cook before sneaking and what does it say? Oh, sorry, let's turn off. Anyway, it says cook before sneaking and trying because the flour is raw and must cook fully before enjoying. So not supposed to be eating raw cookie dough anymore, which is sad because we always said, oh, it's the raw egg. No, now the flour is gonna get you. So anyway, you can, what you can do though. It's not something I've done in a while. Is that you actually can toast the flour. You can put it on a cookie tray, put it in the oven, and toast it for. You need to get it at like 350, so it needs to get up to like 225, maybe something like that. It needs to get up there a little bit, and you just toast it, and then you can not use egg, but then you can mix up cookie dough batter with your butter and your chocolate chips and all that fun stuff, a little bit of salt, a little bit of vanilla, and then you enjoy your cookie dough. I'm not saying do that, but I'm just saying if you're going to say no, I demand raw cookie dough. That is one way that you can get it. So I'm going to add some baking soda. This is the one thing that baking soda. Between the soda and the powder, I am always having to like look at the recipe because I can never quite remember because they are two very very different products. They're not interchangeable and they do two completely different things. Um, I know soda is much more. I mean, powder is much more of like a leavening agent. You're gonna make stuff rise. Um, and soda does something different. And sometimes you have recipes that have two in them, so they do both, but they're not interchangeable. So if the recipe says soda, then you have got to use soda. But then, like I said, once I've put the soda in my dough, I am pretty much just stirring until it comes together like that. And I'm not going to do much more stirring because I need to add my chocolate chips. Um, So, yeah. So, in talking about domestic violence, there's so many different. There's just no two situations are exactly the same. No two relationships are exactly the same. But there are a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of things to look out for. So, some signs. So, if you're saying, well, I don't know, maybe maybe I'm in a domestic violence relationship, or maybe my sister, my friend, whatever, my mom, my brother, my whatever. Um, so a couple things to kind of look out for are the talking. How do they talk to each other? Does the potential abused person always like do they always put their needs, we're talking about a mom, right? But do they always say, okay, his needs come first, my needs are going to come second, things like that? That's not I mean, I'm not saying that's domestic violence, but I'm saying that's one of those, I wonder what's going on things. Or if maybe they were always a person that always had a really great personality, the life of the party. They were always boisterous. They were always, happy and whatnot. And now they're not. Now they've had this complete different change in personality. that's a huge red sign. So that's a sign where you go, we need to talk because something isn't right, and find out what that is. I mean, there could be a lot of other reasons, a lot of, health reasons or something why a person's personality changes. But usually in a relationship, it's, it doesn't change unless they think it needs to, because they're changing their relationships to make another person happy. They're changing their relationship. They're changing their personality to make another person happy in the relationship because they know if they don't, they'll be, they could be abused. So anyway, that's a real red flag. Another huge red flag is if maybe um, that person is isolated now. So again, maybe they did a lot of stuff with family or they had friends that they did stuff with, and now suddenly they're staying in. They're not going to Christmas. They're making excuses why they can't talk on the phone, or they say, or they tell you, I can't talk on the phone. He's not here right now. Or, my partner, doesn't want me talking to you anymore. So there's a lot of those red flags. So if those red flags come up, then that's something that you need to sit down and talk to your friend about. Okay, so I'm going to add chocolate chips to my chocolate chip cookies. So I have two different kinds here. This was one that I picked up in the store recently that I really, really loved. They're from Toll House, so they're just called Simply Delicious. And they basically only have three, there's no way you're going to see that with these lights, three ingredients. It says they have chocolate, cocoa butter, and sugar. That's all they have. I like that. I like the less ingredients, the better. Um, I, but I had just a little bit left in my bag, so I'm also going to go with dark chocolate. So I'm going to add. So I have about a fourth of a cup of the Simply Delicious milk chocolate, and I'm going to add about oh, just maybe half a cup. The recipe usually asks, it says, oh, add the whole 12-ounce bag, which is about a cup and a half. But I don't know. You don't have to use the whole bag. Um, I'm going to hold it back a little bit. But these just have a few. They have chocolate, sugar, cocoa butter, milk fat, non-fat milk, natural flavor. What natural flavor? But these are just a little bit darker. So it gives a nice contrast. So you kind of get a little bit light, a little bit dark. So it's kind of nice. So yeah, so that's kind of, I've been rambling a little bit in making my cookies, and I'm going to quickly end here. So I have all my cookie dough mixed together. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake about 9 of these, and then the rest are going to go into the freezer. I'm going to put the rest of the batter in um, a Ziploc bag or a bag that zips, whatever. You can't say Ziploc. And they are going to be put in I'll just make them in a log. And the great thing about them is that they're there, and anybody can go take it out of the freezer. They can um, pop as many or as few as they want on a cookie sheet and cook up fresh cookies. Because I truly think that fresh cookies are about the best thing in the world. Um, I I just don't see the value in let's bake up all these cookies and store them someplace. No, let's bake up what we want and then eat them fresh because that's the best time. And I have not made these very even, but I have made them about uniform, and that's kind of the key to baking cookies. Is that, well, that one's not. You want them about all the same, about all the same. So these are going to go in the oven, and we'll have fresh cookies in about 12 minutes at 375. So that was a really, really easy recipe. I didn't have to go crazy. Everything I had for it was in the cupboard. And, like I said, now I have cookies, and my son has cookies, and he can pop those in and eat them whenever he wants. So thank you for listening to me today. Like I said, this is kind of my first foray into the world of talking. I love to talk. I love to give you my opinion. I love to tell you what I think about that situation. So I hope that you will come back and hear my other uh, podcast, my other ramblings, as you would say. So subscribe and hit the little bell, please. So when I do um, put up another one, you'll know all about it. And if you want, in the comments below, tell me what you think. Tell me what you might like me to talk about in future episodes, what you're maybe dealing with. Is it toxic relationships? Is it family? Thanksgiving is coming up. Are you having issues with, your family? You want to talk about Christmas gifts? Do you want to talk about being old like I am? There's a whole bunch of things out there that that we can talk about, and I would love to have you come back and listen more. So have a wonderful, fantastic day, and remember everything I said tonight was my musings of from Dr. Michelle. Um, but a lot of them are based in pure fact. So I appreciate you. Stay well and stay safe.